Hello, welcome to Zeteo's live election night special. How are you all feeling so far? Nervous? It's just past 10 p.m. Eastern here in Washington, D.C. The polls have closed in the vast majority of states, including just moments ago in the key swing state of Nevada. The exit poll is also out and saying the top issue for voters in this country is democracy, above the economy, and that they rank abortion higher than immigration. Not the greatest of messages for a Republican Party, which, aside from running on fascism and racism and sexism, ran on those issues, immigration and the economy. We don't have a president-elect yet, though, in what I believe, many believe, to be the most consequential US presidential election of our lifetimes. And maybe, if the polls are to be believed, is one of the closest elections of our lifetime. We've had polls showing neck and neck. We have one candidate described as a fascist by his own chief of staff and top general, running for election again, having lost in 2020 and then incited an armed insurrection against the United States government. He's also a convicted criminal. We have another candidate who is the first black woman to run for president, who is the sitting vice president, who has refused again and again to break with her boss, the sitting president, on the greatest moral issue of our time, Gaza. So, sadly, genocide and fascism are both on the ballot tonight. Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. And we also have the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, and Cornel West among third-party and independent candidates vying for votes in swing states, possibly setting themselves up as spoilers. There is so much to discuss tonight, and I'll be joined by some great guests from across the country. Big names, activists, analysts. We'll be live until 11 p.m. Eastern tonight, and then back again at 11:30 p.m. with California Congressman Ro Khanna and Hollywood's very own lefties Michael Moore and Cynthia Nixon. Coming up in a moment, we'll kick off our live coverage this hour with one of the most progressive pro-Palestine members of Congress, who hails from perhaps the most crucial swing state of all, Pennsylvania. But before I go to her, have you subscribed to Zeteo? Are you one of our nearly 300,000 subscribers across the world? One of our nearly 40,000 paid subscribers? If not, what are you waiting for? Please do go to Zeteo.com tonight and stand up for independent journalism on a night like tonight, where the mainstream media will probably be failing us in some way or another yet again. Support us with your subscriptions because the free press is not free. Okay, plug out of the way. Let's dive into these results tonight as we're getting them. Joining me now to kick off Zeteo's live election special is Pennsylvania Congresswoman and squad member, Representative Summer Lee. Congresswoman, thank you for coming on our live stream tonight. You are in the belly of the beast. You are in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. What is going on in Pennsylvania, Congresswoman?
Well, AP called my race, so there's one's down.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. But you know what? It has been obviously a very active, competitive space. We had competing rallies just yesterday. So it has been a lot of pressure on Pennsylvania right now. We just wait, but we heard that there were high turnout. A lot of folks were voting from, I think, about college campuses in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and places in between. So I think that we can hope that if the turnout is as high as it is, that hopefully that it would mean that we got, some positive results, however you see positive these days.
Not sure if you saw that story out of Nevada tonight, and the polls in Nevada have just closed, where the Democratic Secretary of State is worried that ballots are being rejected, mail-in ballots, because students sign them with a signature that doesn't match their driving license, because students don't have signatures. They did everything online. And we now live in a world where mail-in ballots might be rejected because young people don't know how to do signatures. I don't know if you saw that hilarious but scary story.
I didn't. I've obviously followed the whole debate around whether we should bring cursive back to schools. And I think that this is what those folks were worried about, as it turns out. But no, I didn't see it. But I mean, listen, whether it's students and their signatures or folks who their ballots are not being counted because, for instance, in Pennsylvania, right, they didn't have it in the secrecy envelope. There are many reasons that Republicans, quite frankly, can use to try to invalidate ballots. And right now, the courts are going to have a busy days as they face challenges as we make sure that everybody's votes are counted. Right? People want to vote. We know that fraud is not an actual statistical thing that we need to worry about. But what we do need to worry about are people who are going to continue to attack, just everyday folks, citizens, trying to do their civic duty in voting.
And even tonight, Donald Trump has been posting about fraud in Philly and Detroit, which led to Philadelphia's DA, Larry Krasner, coming out very strongly and saying there's no evidence of anything. I can't put my finger on what it is about Philly and Detroit that might bother Donald Trump. What could it be?
I don't know. Donald Trump said that he was going to get, Donald Trump said he was getting folks. So I can't speak to that. But I do find it funny. Obviously, there are commonalities in those two places. But I remember 4 years ago when Donald Trump was saying while Philly was counting their votes, he was screaming about stopping the vote, stopping the count, right? So he has a record of really, really not wanting Philadelphia's votes counted. So I applaud Philly as they conduct their Philadelphia County as they conduct their election. I have faith that they're going to do a fabulous job at it, that all the votes are going to be counted, that there will be no fraud. And Larry Krasner seemed like he meant business. I'm certain that we shouldn't have any problems here in Pennsylvania.
You've got Elon Musk spending a lot of time and money in Pennsylvania on Donald Trump's behalf. He's at Mar-a-Lago tonight with Trump watching the results come in. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall for that one? How much impact has that money had on Pennsylvania? I'm hearing reports that some of his door knockers weren't really door knocking, they were just collecting checks, that Democrats have actually had a better ground game in Pennsylvania in your crucial state.
I think that's what everyone's hearing, right? Down the ground here, I don't know anybody in Western Pennsylvania who got a door knock from one of Elon Musk's crew. That's a positive thing. We've seen it before, right? Republicans don't really invest in that grassroots, kind of door knocking phone calls. In fact, I don't think that they invest very much in conversations that don't. That aren't on ads, that aren't on social media. And I think that that is a benefit to the Democrats because that ground game here has been, it's been big, it's been massive, right? Democrats from the larger state party, right, the coordinated campaign down to individual candidates at the congressional, the Senate, the state house levels have been out. They've been knocking. Volunteers have been activated. We've seen it here. It's one of the good things when people come up to us and they say, listen, somebody from your team has knocked my door 3 times. I've told them to take us off the list. We're voting for you. And we reassure them that, listen, this is what we got to do. But I think that that's a good sign on the Democrats that they have been knocking, whereas I've not heard anyone say that they've had a door knock from Republicans.
How worried are you about the role that Gaza might play in this election? The last time you and I saw each other in person, we were both at an event with a lot of Muslim Americans in Pennsylvania. And a lot of people in that event were cheering Jill Stein. How much do you worry that the Democrats, the leadership of your party, the president and vice president, by sending all these weapons to Netanyahu, by refusing to put any conditions on aid, by backing everything Israel has done at the UN, in every forum, how much may that depress Muslim American, Arab American, progressive voters, young voters in places like Pennsylvania, but also, of course, Michigan?
It's a conversation that comes up a lot. I mean, obviously, I'm someone who people talk to me about this. I think the thing that I'm most worried about, and I'm just going to be frank, right? I'm less worried about its impact on the election than I am on its impact on Gaza, like on the impact
Well
that
said.
folks right now in Gaza are still living through. That's something that we have to continue to care about, continue to worry about. It's not something that we're going to be able to push aside. And I know that there are a lot of voters who would have, for convenience, wished that this was not something that we were dealing with politically. But the reality is that people are dealing with this in their real lives. And we do it a disservice when we pretend that we don't have an impact, that our administration has not had an impact on the lives of people in Gaza and on their family members here in America, and that those people very righteously are angered, they're afraid, they feel like they've not been listened to, that people have not necessarily wanted them on their team. And we are going to have to answer for that. I think that there were a lot of things that voters have talked about this election cycle that they care about. They've shared with us their concerns. They shared their fears. They've shared the things that make them hopeful. And it's always our job to be responsive to that. It's always our job to have an answer for that. And that doesn't stop, right? I like everybody else, I do not want Trump to win this election. I just don't. But I hope that on tomorrow and every day after this, we are very serious as a party about what direction we're going in, about what our coalition looks like, and that
Yes.
we are not becoming those things that we say that we don't want to be. And that is a real challenge that we're having right now.
Let me ask you this, Congressman. You've been someone who's been quite outspoken on this issue. You've voted to restrict aid to Israel, offensive weaponry. You've called for a ceasefire earlier than most of your colleagues. You've survived multiple attempts by AIPAC and pro-Israel groups to eject you from Congress in the primary process. What do you say? But you've endorsed Kamala Harris. What do you say on the doorstep when someone says to you, I can't vote for this party, genocide's a red line for me? What were you saying to people in recent days?
Listen, I tell folks that it's important that we vote for each other for me, it's never about the person whose name is on the ballot. I'm not going to say never, right? It's less about the individual's name on the ballot than the people who I'm showing up for. So when I go to vote and I ask them when they go to vote that you vote for the person who is most marginalized in your life, you vote for the person who is most vulnerable, and you keep them in mind. And those are the people who we're showing up for right now. I think that voting is one of the tools that we have in our toolbox. I don't think you should ever use your own tools to harm yourself. So I think that right now there are a lot of people who aren't going to be able to do it, and I don't think that arguing with those folks is important, or even the thing that is most urgent. The thing that I would rather help people do on those doors is find themselves in this system. What comes next? How do we get there? What are the steps that we need to take right now to have an electoral system that reflects your values? And that is not an easy conversation, but it's one that we have to start having right now. So that's just my process, and I can't really speak for other folks about how they handle it.
Last question to you, Congresswoman. If Harris wins, obviously they will have to talk a great deal about what her policies will look like, what kind of president she'll be. Historically, though, it will be a major moment for the United States of America. Only the second black president and the first black woman president. What would that mean to you personally?
It's incredible that there are so many historic things that could happen tonight, and I feel like I haven't thought much about that. But I think about my grandma, right? My grandma's a black woman, right? I think 83 years old. She never considered that she would get one black president, let alone get another black president, and a woman at that. Kamala Harris would also be the first woman president, and that resonates so deeply with people who have been told that our country cannot change, that our country has no more room to expand to fit the diverse perspective and experiences of everybody in this country. And right, and it might not be that you get everything you want there, but to think about all of the black folks, the brown folks, our Asian neighbors and family members and loved ones who have not seen this, to see that this is a possible, and that you can also disagree with your own folks in those positions, is monumental in that sense. And I think that for me to not have 4 years of Donald Trump is going to be life-saving for people in communities like the very communities of the identities that she represents. It's going to be life-saving for people in PA-12. When we think about the abortion restrictions, when we think about how many mass shootings we deal with every day, when we think about what the Supreme Court can look like for the next generation, those are very real threats that I do not take lightly. It's big.
It is big. And Donald Trump hasn't lost yet. So let's see what happens if history is going to be made tonight. Congresswoman Summer Lee, you've won your race tonight. Congratulations. Thanks for taking time out of a busy night to join us on Zeteo. Appreciate it. So that's Pennsylvania, crucial swing state. There are two other crucial swing states in the Rust Belt. Pennsylvania's one, Wisconsin and Michigan are the other two. Joining me now from Michigan, our former U.S. Democratic Congressman Andy Levin, who represented Michigan's 9th Congressional District, and Layla Elabed, co-founder of the Uncommitted Movement in Michigan, where it all began. They join me now. Andy, Layla, thank you so much for joining me on Zeteo's live coverage. Let me go to you first. Andy Levin, you have won elections in Michigan. You have represented people in Michigan. What does it feel like tonight in Michigan? What's the mood on the ground?
Well, it's super close, Mehdi. It's not clear what's going to happen. I do feel that we can say that Kamala Harris will win many fewer votes in the Arab American and Muslim communities than Joe Biden did. And I hope she can win anyway, but it makes me very nervous.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are nervous tonight. Layla, you obviously were one of the co-founders of the Uncommitted Movement, which began in Michigan, picked up hundreds of thousands of votes in the primaries across the country, turned up at the DNC only to be blocked by the party apparatus, by the Harris campaign, didn't have a speaker on stage, ended up not endorsing Harris, but not endorsing a third-party candidate. What do you make of tonight's election in Michigan? Is this where you thought you'd be when you launched the Uncommitted Movement?
I don't think that we would be in this moment where it was going to be so close. And I really have to say that being in my community, I went out and voted this morning. I've been talking to voters, I've been talking to my community members. Overwhelmingly, today has been a very painful day for our anti-war movement, and especially for Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and young people who've who right now are feeling left out from their own party. And I just keep thinking that it did not have to be this close.
Yeah.
And I really, I'm really frustrated. I'm feeling very emotional right now. I'm sad and I'm feeling betrayed. And, there is there was a clear pathway for Vice President Harris to win overwhelmingly in a state like Michigan by turning a page away from Biden's disastrous Gaza policy. And,
Yes.
I think this unwillingness to shift on a more humanitarian policy may have, very real consequences. And I think we're going to see that here in Michigan.
Layla, you mentioned that you went out to vote this morning. Do you mind me asking, did you vote at the top of the ticket? And if so, how?
I put a lot of my concentration and a lot of my hope in down ballot races of candidates that, I believe in, candidates that I align with. And I really would have loved to have been part of that voting bloc that, votes for the very first female Black president. I had really hoped for that throughout, our months of
Yes.
campaigning through Uncommitted. And unfortunately, because of Vice President Harris' unwillingness to shift away from Biden's current policy on Gaza, I rooted in my beliefs and my morals, skipped the top of the ticket this year.
You weren't tempted by Jill Stein, like a lot of people in Michigan are?
I think voters who are voting for Jill Stein or any other candidate believe that they are voting, their conscience and trying to be strategic in their votes. And I think that regardless, many, many Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and voters in my community went out today, went out during the days of early voting and voted through their pain.
Andy Levin, I speak to Democrats who say, yeah, it's bad that Muslim and Arab Americans have turned on us because of Gaza. We're losing a lot of support. But they also tell me we can still win Michigan tonight without them. We can win through college-educated white women in the suburbs who are angry about abortion. We can win through auto workers who are delighted with Joe Biden's labor policy and are worried about return of Trump. You, as I said, you've campaigned in Michigan. You've been elected in Michigan. Can Harris still win tonight, Michigan, without substantive Muslim or Arab American support?
Well, first of all, Mehdi, a lot of Arab American and Muslims will still vote for Harris. It's
Yes,
not so
true.
simple. And there are auto workers who are Arab Americans
True.
and
Good point.
Muslims and so forth. So all these things overlap. I think it'll be a disaster for democracy in the world, for democracy in the United States. I actually think it'll be much, much worse for Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, Palestinian citizens of Israel. Those of us who advocate for them here, Trump says he's deporting us if he can deport us and throwing us in jail if he can't deport us. That's what he has said about those of us who protest. But I do think that Kamala Harris can win Michigan. There are many factors here. There's not only how Trumpy Trump is and how horrifying, he's also very old. Kamala Harris is much younger. She's a new generation of leadership. The African-American female population is excited. The AAPI community is excited. She, has a lot of support. So I think, and I also think that we just don't even still comprehend what an earthquake the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court is in American politics. Yes. I took my dad's 93 and he and I went to a bunch of senior places. We went to one place, to talk to voters. And we went to one place, there were 19 women and one man. And the guy was a white guy, 95 years old, both a Korea and a Vietnam vet. He had already voted for Trump. All 19 women had voted or were going to vote for Harris. this wasn't like a political gathering, Mehdi. It's like an assisted
Yeah.
living facility, right? And so I do think there's a chance she can win anyway. I'm just the same as I've been since the very beginning of this. I feel like two things line up here. The right thing to do, which is to change course on this war in Gaza that's so horrifying, because it's the right policy for U.S. national security interests, for humanitarian and moral interests, and so forth. But also, it's the right thing for Democrats to do politically. And so I really wish that Vice President Harris had shown more that she will be a different president on this than President Biden was. I hope she'll win and be that different president. But I'll tell you one thing I know for sure. We voted now. The polls are closed here. Today's November 5th. On November 6th, we have to pick back up with our movement of human rights and peace in the Middle East and pressure the president. The problem is, if it's Donald Trump, he doesn't care about us at all,
Yes.
and he doesn't care about Palestinians. And you know, if it's Harris, at least we have a chance to pressure her. Just
I
like
share
the
that
civil
analysis.
rights movement
I
had
share
a
that
chance
analysis,
to pressure LBJ. You know.
Layla, I share the analysis Andy's offering about, you know, at least with Harris there's a chance Trump doesn't care about Palestinians. And yet, what did I see with my own lying eyes on social media a couple of days ago? Donald Trump in Dearborn, Michigan, being applauded by a group of Arab Americans. How is it that there is a minority, it's a minority, but a minority of Arab Americans in places like Michigan who are not just rejecting Harris, but are embracing Trump? Have they forgotten the Trump record? Is Trump just exploiting them? What's going on here?
Yeah, it really frustrates me as a Democrat, as someone who's been leading as a challenge to the status quo of the process of the Democratic Party, that Vice President Harris and her campaign and the leadership of the Democratic Party left open this void for Trump to kind of swoop in into our community and blatantly lie to us. And did that, and he was able to do that because of the willful silence of Democratic leaders, leaving that void open for Trump to be able to do that.
And the void, Andy, that Layla refers to is a void that, wow, in many ways, it wasn't even just a void. They didn't just leave it empty. They literally, Andy, went to Michigan, the Democratic Party, with Liz Cheney, with Richie Torres, and with Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton lectured Arab Americans on how the Jews were there first from the time of King David, which is an insane point to make in the middle of a contentious one. You are a Jewish former member of Congress, a Democrat. What did you make of that Bill Clinton speech?
You know, I don't even know about that, Mehdi, but I agree with Layla, but I also think that we have to be appreciating the full complexity here. The Muslim community in the United States is like the Jewish community and the Christian community in the sense that they have their fundamentalists. And something's been going on for a few years here. The evangelical Christian right has gone to some of the conservative imams and say, you don't like queer people too. You are anti-abortion too. And some of these conservative imams have taken large numbers of people to school boards and supported book bans and so forth. So like when the mayor of Hamtramck supported Trump, that was no surprise to a lot of us here, because the politics of Hamtramck, despite it being a very Democratic city, so you kind of have to run as a Democrat to win.
Yeah.
Some of the leadership there is very right wing on social issues. And of course, they are attracted to Trump. So that's an element of it that we have to throw in the mix, in addition to the problem of the war in Gaza and the way it's been waged and the way the U.S. has funded it and provided the weapons.
Andy, talk to me about the Jewish community in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, where, you know, Richie Torres was sent to reassure Jewish Americans that Kamala Harris is not anti-Israel. She's totally pro-Israel. And there's been a lot of debate about what are her views, and there's been some comments about her husband who is Jewish. What does a Jewish community, you know, which is largely Democratic, largely liberal, but post October 7th has been very, you know, concerned about anti-Semitism, concerned about Israel, etc., etc. You're someone who, as I say, You were a Jewish member of Congress, but you were always critical of Israel. And AIPAC were not fans of yours and played a role in defeating you when you lost your election. Where does the Jewish community find itself now, a year on from October 7th, on this election night?
Well, we will see, but I think that 2/3 of Jews will vote for Kamala Harris, whether it's 2/3 to 75%. The Jewish electorate cares about a lot of things. We care about civil rights, about climate change, about reproductive rights, certainly. And so it's not a single issue thing. And I just have to say, Mehdi, that many Jews in America know that to be pro-Israel isn't to be like Donald Trump. I mean, many Jews understand that the only way to have a secure homeland for the Jewish people there is to fully realize the political and the human rights of the Palestinians too. Both are peoples on the land, and these cousins have to come to live in peace together. We have to help them do that, not take sides in a simplistic, cartoonish way.
Last question to you, Layla. Uncommitted played a big role this year in putting pressure on the Democrats to shift on Gaza. Unfortunately, you were not successful in getting what you wanted. A lot of your critics to the left of you are not happy with you. Over the last day or two, there's been a lot of people angry at you on social media saying you sold out the anti-war movement, that you took money from a group that said you couldn't endorse anyone but the Democrats. I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to some of your critics who may be watching tonight.
Yeah, I think that like any movement, we aren't insulated from criticisms. And, I think the fact that we were able to run a nationwide campaign on a shoestring budget, especially when you think about this as a nationwide anti-war movement that had a very short runway compared to the billions and billions of dollars that the pro-war side uses. I mean, using $25 million in one congressional race. Even with all of that, I do want to say, I understand the criticisms because ultimately we didn't win the thing that we set out to do. And we built this anti movement within the Democratic Party to challenge and be a direct opposition to the status quo, to the anti, the pro-war, pro-genocide, pro-apartheid forces within the Democratic Party. And a funding entity like Movement Voter Project actually does fund many other organizations, over 500 organizations, some who support nonpartisan campaigns, as well as third party backed candidates. Ultimately Uncommitted's decision to not endorse Vice President Harris, but to recommend a vote that blocks President Trump and, recommend in voters in swing states not vote for third party because of our our broken electoral system, was not because it was a funding decision, but it was based on what we were able to build through this anti-war coalition that also happens to live within the Democratic coalition as well. So just understanding where frustrations are, that we thought we would be farther along too. We thought we would win something. We thought that Democrats, the leadership of the Democratic Party, would see, 9 months, 9 months ahead of right now, we showed that they were going to take voters for granted in places like Michigan. And they made the calculation that they could try to win. And I just hope that, those Dick Cheney Democrat voters actually turn out.
Yeah, I hope they don't come to regret not having listened to Uncommitted or shifted even one iota on Gaza. Let's see what happens tonight in Michigan. Andy Levin, Layla Elabed, thank you both for your time on this very busy night. Appreciate you both. Interesting what Andy said there about the Jewish community voting for Harris. And they will, and they often do vote Democratic. But Israel, the world's only Jewish state, Israel supports Trump. All the polls show that the Israeli public, by a big majority, would like Donald Trump to win tonight, which I find quite fascinating and telling. So, I know that because a poll was done. And polls have played a very big part in this election here at home. As ever, we're obsessed with polls. The polls showed both candidates, Trump and Harris, neck and neck right up into the lead up tonight. It showed this to be the closest election for years. But is it going to be that close? Are we looking at votes coming in tonight that match the polls? Who better to talk about all of this with than Ryan O'Donnell, Deputy Executive Director at the progressive think tank and polling firm Data for Progress. Ryan, thanks for joining me tonight on what could be a historic night. What do you make of the numbers we're seeing so far? We've had a lot of votes counted in a lot of the swing states like Georgia, like Pennsylvania. Any trends, any numbers jumping out to you that you want to share with our viewers?
I mean, so far, I think, Donald Trump has been able to hold or improve his margins in a lot of the rural counties, especially in the Southwest. He really held things together and outperformed in Florida and parts of Georgia. You would certainly rather be Donald Trump right now in Georgia and North Carolina. Right now, it's going to come down to the blue wall, I would say, for Kamala. That's what we're waiting for. Polls this whole time have said that it's going to be an even race. Polls got it right this time, it seems. A lot of pollsters, including us, said that all of these races were probably going to be decided between +2 for Trump, +2 for Kamala, and that looks like it's about what's going to happen. And so I think right now we just need to keep watching the blue wall and see how that comes in. And that's I would say the hope that the Harris campaign has at this point.
It's interesting that, and just for people joining us right now, Ryan is with Data for Progress. And the blue wall, of course, is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the Rust Belt states that tend to vote together. There was hope for the Harris campaign in the Sun Belt swing states of Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina. North Carolina is what Trump won in 2016 and 2020. The networks have already projected a win for Trump in North Carolina. Why do you think it is the case that some people in the last 24, 48 hours, Ryan, thought, you know what, she might actually win this cleanly on election night? I had experienced people who have run election campaigns before tell me it could all be over by 11:30 tonight, which it almost certainly won't be. The Iowa poll came out at the weekend, which showed her up over Trump in a state that he normally wins by a big margin. What was going on in the last 24, 48 hours, do you think?
I mean, I think everybody thought that Harris was closing strong. I think overall it is going to be, in general, is going to be a good night for polling and probably a bad night for sleep for a lot of us. But I think that the Harris poll or the Seltzer poll in Iowa, for example, for those that don't know, and Seltzer is one of the most renowned pollsters in the country, tends to get things right all the time. Got things right in 2016 and 2020 when a lot of us didn't. And she projected a Harris +3 margin in Iowa, and it looks like Donald Trump will win that state very comfortably. So I think just in general, also, it just kind of felt like Harris was closing very, very strong. Harris was out doing massive rallies, raising more money, spending more money, and Donald Trump was doing whatever with microphones on his, at his rallies, and so. So I think the vibes were good is the easiest way to say it. And I think the Harris poll mixed with some of that other stuff, I think, made Democrats a little bit extra confident. And that's what we were seeing then.
As you were speaking, Ryan, if we need any more evidence of what a neck and neck race this is, Trump and Harris were at 49.2% each in Wisconsin. That's without all the votes counted. And then it switched the counter from 49.2 to 49.1. For Harris. So now it's 49.2 versus 49.1. This is where we are at 10:40 at night on election night. You mentioned kind of her closing strong and vibes. What about this argument that there is a shy Trump voter, that polls underestimate Trump support in the country, that people don't want to tell pollsters, yeah, I'm voting for the racist fascist dude?
I've never bought that. I mean, have you met a Trump voter? They're not shy.
They're not shy.
They're not. Point. I mean, they loved, I almost wish they would tell me less about it. Okay. And so.
But haven't polls in the past understated his support?
100%. So, in 2016 and 2020, pollsters understated Donald Trump's support. And I think that's why there were obviously a lot of eyes on pollsters this time around to see if we could get it right. And thankfully, it looks like we did, for the polling industry anyway. And so I think more probably what happened in 2016, there were way less controls on things like white college or white non-college voters. And, there were way less controls on partisanship in general. And then in 2020, people tried to fix some of that. It didn't really work, but nobody really knew if it was because of the pandemic or not. And now this time, there's been a lot of discourse about polling kind of, over controlling for polls in some ways by, controlling more for partisanship and party registration and recalled presidential vote. But I think that's what pollsters feel like needed to happen in order to be able to call this race correctly. And I think, as you can see, some of the polls that didn't do that were pretty far out there, whereas our polls and other polls were dead even.
We're big fans of the Data for Progress polls. Zeteo has collaborated with Data for Progress to do polling on Gaza in particular. So people watching at home, do check out some of our polling that we've done with Data for Progress. While you were speaking, Ryan, CNN called Iowa for Donald Trump. So Ann Seltzer, the famous pollster from Iowa, she didn't get that one right, did she?
It does not seem like she did. I mean, that was certainly a shot of hopium for everybody when that Ann Seltzer poll came out. But I mean, that's one of them where she doesn't control for those party, kind of famously, and she's been right by doing that in 2016 and 2020. So, she's been very open about that part of her methodology, and she's said, like, at some point I'm going to be very wrong.
Yeah, I think this one's going to be
time.
one that right-wingers throw at her for a while. Last question, Ryan. The exit poll that came out earlier showed that the top issues for voters were in order for the national level was democracy number 1, economy number 2, abortion number 3, immigration number 4. That's democracy over economy, abortion over immigration. Economy and immigration both being Republican-coded issues in this campaign, and abortion and democracy being Democratic Party coded issues. Should we read too much into that? Can we?
I think you can definitely read too much into exit polls. Exit polls are, they start off pretty inaccurate, I would say, and then they get more accurate as things go along because they'll use models and projections from real life turnout. And so early on, it doesn't mean as much, whereas like when you get further along, it means more. And, one exit poll does say that democracy is at the top. The AP Votecast, which is the other kind of exit poll, doesn't show that at all. So for me, I would personally trust the pre-election polling on this, which basically just shows that the economy and inflation and just cost is really driving everything as people's top issue.
By the way, I have to ask this one thing as a British American, as someone who covered more elections in the UK than the US in my career. Why is it in the UK the exit poll tells you the result of the election, but in the US it doesn't?
I would love, if I could talk to some people that you might know in the UK.
All right, let's do it. Let's get an answer to that question because it's fascinating me for a
figure this out.
Why can't an American exit poll tell us the result so we don't have to stay up all night wondering and guessing each race with CNN and NBC? Ryan, we'll have to leave it there. Ryan O'Donnell is with Data for Progress. Thank you for your time and your analysis tonight. I appreciate it. So, Donald Trump, is he coming back? Are we going to have a second Trump presidency? This is the third time he's running for president. As I've said throughout this campaign, all of this year, and since the start of our live coverage tonight, the man is a fascist. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of his chief of staff, John Kelly. Take the word of his former top general, Mark Milley. They say he's a fascist. What does that mean if America tonight elects a fascist to run this country? What does that mean for American democracy? Who better to ask than Danielle Moodie, host of the Woke AF podcast, and Reed Gallen, former Republican strategist, co-founder of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project. They were with me in London recently, where we were debating Trump and democracy on Al Jazeera English with a Trump spokesman. So let's pick up from that discussion. Thank you both for joining me tonight on a big night. And let's talk about where we are today, where it's still neck and neck, and Ryan and I were just discussing. Reed, did you think it might be all over by 11:30 tonight, as some were suggesting?
I think I had a little hope that it might when I was on an airplane earlier today.
Okay.
But, it was one of those things like, maybe North Carolina would go Kamala Harris's way. Like, it was a nice thing to believe, but I never really believed it, if that makes sense. And so, look, I think that this is a 50-50 country. And Mehdi, I think that one thing we have to, understand, is disappointing as this is, and to no one more than me, Donald Trump has become the traditional Republican candidate circa 2024. There are a lot of people who might not have ever really been Donald Trump fans, but they code Republicans. Donald Trump is the standard bearer, and they're going to vote for him. As we've talked about, many times over the years. He gets a massive discount rate on his bad behavior. He's going to get that again tonight. Do I think that he's going to be president again? I don't, but I think it's going to be a lot longer and a lot closer than almost all of us wanted it to be.
Yeah, and it's a very good point you make about partisanship. The idea that you could put up anyone as a Republican or a Democrat, and tens of millions of Americans would just vote blindly for that person, Democrat or Republican, such as the allure and the strength of partisanship in this country. Danielle, does it still shock you anymore that tens and tens of millions of your fellow Americans will vote for this guy who not just did, 2016 and Muslim ban and all the stuff we saw then, and 2020 and insurrection and all the stuff with that, but even the way he's just closed this election campaign in the last few days, saying, I wish I'd never left office, regaling us with tales of Arnold Palmer's genitalia, calling Kamala Harris low IQ and stupid and lazy as hell, all of those famously anti-black tropes. All of the stuff he's done in the last week alone, just one of those things would have disqualified a Mitt Romney or a John McCain.
They would have, and that's no longer the world that we live in, right? I think that we are living in a place where white supremacy, I said this in 2016 on election night. I said that the election of Donald Trump was white supremacy's last stand. And much like the 100-Year War, I didn't know how long that was going to last.
Yes.
But that, a joke that a friend of mine, actually, Jonathan Metzl, the author of Dying of Whiteness, says, he's just like, he's like, sometimes I feel like the guy in the 100-Year War that 3 years in is like, oh, is it going to end soon? Yes. And you're like, no, it's not actually. You have 97 more years to go. And so I think that, right now, we cannot continue to underestimate how racist and how misogynist America is. And why would we think that it would change when we do very little to educate the populace and bring people together? I mean, just look at our K through 12 education system and what we teach young people about the founding of this country, about the truth of this country. And then you wonder why we get to this place where we have to try and convince people to vote for their lives and for their safety and for their economic viability, when they're told that if you get rid of the immigrants, if you get rid of the Black family down the street, if you get rid of the Latino family, then you'll be good. You'll be in a better position. So there's no work that they actually have to put in, right? All they have to do is kick those people out. And then, they get to be at the top of the pyramid, the cream of the crop. And that's what Donald Trump has fed them. That's what they believe. And because we have done no work to do otherwise, because we've been too afraid to tell the truth about who America is. I think about this all the time, Mehdi, that I wonder, if what would America have looked like if Reconstruction had been able to last more than 12 years? What would this country have looked like if, following the Civil War and following Reconstruction, we didn't have 100 years of Jim Crow, right? Like, and then we actually taught about what these things did to this country and how it is a emblematic of where we are right now, how these things are not siloed events, right? So I it does not shock me. No, I guess I have my eyes too wide open, or as the right would say, maybe I'm just too woke.
Too woke. Some pretty shocking forecasting read coming from the New York Times tonight. They have just adjusted their election model estimate to say Donald Trump, they believe, has an 87% chance of victory tonight. Nate Cohn, their chief political analyst, I want to read what he's saying. He's saying, for the first time tonight, we consider Trump likely to win the presidency. He has an advantage in each of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. To win, Harris would need to sweep all three. There is still a lot of vote left, but in the voting so far, Trump is narrowly but discernibly ahead. What's your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that this comes from the New York Times, certainly, right? If they decide that this is where they want to be and then they're wrong, then, oh, well. And if they're right, then they get to go to the briefing room in January of 2025 and say, we told you were going to win. We were there the whole time. Now, do I think that Nate Cohn's acting in bad faith? I don't think he probably is. But I think it's one of those things where, you just talked to the last guy about polling and all that other stuff. Like, why don't we just let the votes get counted? I don't know at what point getting most of the country anxious, upset, fired up. Anything else is really anything other than clickbait at this point, Mehdi. And I would say this too is, I want to extend what Danielle said a little bit on the work that needed to be done, which is for a long time, as even in the last 10 years, as Trump and Trumpism was coming on, most of the country, and I would say most of the political and media elite and the financial elite didn't take seriously not only Trump, but what was growing, in these states, right? Under the Obama administration, the Democratic Party lost hundreds, maybe 1,000 legislative seats. Those places became incubators for not only the kind of stuff we're seeing tonight, but also the kinds of candidates that were able to fill out and make all this stuff real, as we're seeing in a place like Florida, where nearly 60% of the population wants more access to abortion. But because a Republican governor and a Republican legislature asked people to up the threshold with only a 50% vote, I might add, now democracy doesn't work anymore. And as you know, as you've studied, I think, for a long time, Mehdi, like this is oftentimes what happens, right? Democracy votes itself out of existence.
Yeah, and the Republican Party, your former party, is very much about minority rule, right? Oh, if we don't have a majority, we'll just change the rules so that a minority still wins. We see that with their support for the filibuster in the Senate, where 51 votes is not a majority in the Senate. You need 60. And now in Florida, where you need a 60% supermajority, as you say, which was brought in with a 50% vote to prevent a majority of Floridians asking for more abortion rights tonight in their vote in Florida. I got to say, though, you talked about anxiety. Danielle, again, you're a cooler head than I am. I'm feeling a few palpitations when I'm seeing 87% chance of Donald Trump victory, and it's only 10:52.
I mean, but I think that the point is being made. We also have to understand that this is being played out like a horse race, that it's being played out the way that it always is because of clickbait, because of the way that corporate mainstream media works. Am I cool right now, Mehdi? No, I'm not. But I have been preparing, I think, for a long time for the possibility of democracy to end. I think that a lot of us have, that saw Donald Trump, that were shocked in 2016, that felt a bit of a reprieve in 2020, but then saw this resurgence come back again in 2024. And I've said it before that if we were to win tonight, right, this is a 4-year lease that we are going to get on democracy.
Yes.
Because the folks at the Heritage Foundation, Leonard Leo at Federalist Society, the MAGA Supreme Court, the MAGA federal benches, the Elon Musk, the Joe Rogans of the world, they're not going to stop. They will find a younger, slicker, more articulate and person with less baggage than Donald Trump, because what they want is a white Christian nationalist country, right? And what these people who have been, who vote against their best interests over and over again, what they believe is that Donald Trump is their Messiah. You can't battle with people. You can't battle facts with people that in their minds have told themselves that Donald Trump is sent here by God. And this is what white evangelical Christians have told themselves, right? This is how they swallow the pill of Donald Trump, because they say that God gives us interesting tools, right, to work with, but Donald Trump is our tool. So when you try then to meet those people with facts and you say, but he's a fraudster, but he's this, but he's that, they'll throw Bible verses at you, right? So if we have placed people in these positions of power right now, where you have, Alito and Thomas on the court that are corrupt, where they have gotten their money from, what kind of dirt and dealings that they're doing, but there's nothing that the Department of Justice can do. There's nothing. Like, this moment then is not a shock, right? Like, because frankly, it should have probably happened in 2020, but because we were in a global health pandemic and he killed nearly, 500,000 people on his way out the door, folks were like, maybe I don't want to die today. Yes. But apparently they're willing to roll the dice 4 years later.
It's a very good point about the lease. We've got a 4-year lease now with Biden, which in many ways he messed up. And even if she pulls it off tonight, it will be a 4-year lease. Very, very well put. Let me ask you this, Reed. Both you and Danielle have talked about the New York Times modeling, is it clickbait? Is it horse race? Put that to one side. the projections are that he's on course for victory in Georgia. North Carolina's already been called for him in terms of some of these Sun Belt states, which means the 3 Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, become much more important for Harris and the Democrats. You're a former election strategist. You've worked on campaigns. If you had run the Kamala Harris campaign, what would you have done differently to what she did?
I think it's a little bit unfair to try and blame the Harris campaign completely. First of all, they've been around 12 weeks. But I think the one thing that Mehdi that really I noticed that was striking was that after her very convincing debate performance and Trump's disaster, they went conventional. They went back to being Democrats, and they went back to being a, sort of first do no harm kind of party politically, which is what, from my perspective as a former opponent of theirs, they often do. So they lost the swagger. They lost the Brat Summer. They lost Coach Waltz, right? They decided, okay, you know what? Now we're going to play not to lose. And that's, the country was excited about a new option, right? The country was excited about the energy that developed and a tailwind that developed behind Harris when President Biden stepped aside. And if there's something that I think I wish they would have done differently, it was that they would have run a more freewheeling campaign that remained exciting and retained its excitement and didn't worry about, how are we testing our ads, right? How many polls are we going to run on something, right? That they would have had some excitement and really pushed a change narrative, right? Push the turning the page, push the better narrative. We are better than this, as Danielle said. And I think Danielle might have been crawling around in my cranium because everything she said about the last 4 years and potentially the next 4 years if Harris is able to win is 100% right. The bad guys are not going to fold up their tents if Trump does lose tonight. They are going to double down. And in fact, I would say that they would venture to make Kamala Harris as unpopular as they can, as quickly as they can, if she takes office, for exactly what Danielle said, which is finding a J.D. Vance type guy to run through the car wash and make palatable. Because as we said at the top, Mehdi, we only have 2 parties, right? And a lot of the people I talked to when I was on the ground, right, they don't have an emotional connection to either party. One gentleman in a tough neighborhood in Grand Rapids said, I'll vote for Harris because she's the lesser of 2 evils, right? That is not a strong democracy. That is not a strong 2-party system. That is a lot of voters who don't believe it matters either way. And I think if Trump does win tonight, which is possible, I think it will be because of antipathy on a lot of people on the right and apathy on a lot of people in the middle.
Well said, Reed, well said. Last word to you, Danielle. If the Democrats do lose, some people are under some kind of illusion that they're going to become progressive and left-wing and anti-war. That's not the case, is it? I suspect they'll become more right-wing and say we weren't right-wing and anti-woke enough for the country. The country wants people like Trump. We need to be more right-wing.
So I'm going to be very honest, which is that if Donald Trump wins, the Democrats won't need to worry about what kind of party they're going to be because they won't exist. Because fundamentally, this country will be undone in the course of the first 100 days. And whatever measure, whatever guardrail, whatever bounce back people think would happen in a 2028 is not going to happen. So the plans will change. And folks need to really prepare for that reality because there is no we'll get them next time. This has been the point that we have been making since 2016, right? This has been the drum that I have personally been beating, and I know that you and Reed and others have been beating. There is no second bite at the apple here. They have a plan to move on day one. So I honestly, I don't know what Democrats do. We already function in a one-party system right now because the other party is a cult. And if the cult takes over the country, then I'm not quite sure what the options are, except to, leave. I have no idea.
Well, the cult hasn't taken over quite yet. It is 11 p.m. on election night. Let's see if the New York Times is right or wrong in its simulations. We will be watching the results all night long. Reed and Danielle, thank you for joining me at the end of this hour. Appreciate your analysis, as stark and as depressing as it may be to some of you. That's our show for now, but don't count us out for the night just yet. It's a long night, and we don't have a result yet, and we're not going to have a result for a while. So I will be back very soon. I'll be talking to Michael Moore. I'll be speaking to Cynthia Nixon. I'll be speaking to Congressman Ro Khanna in the next hour at around 11:30 p.m. Eastern. Come back and join us. If you've enjoyed this chat, remember, this is what you're getting as a subscriber to our YouTube channel. Imagine how much more you could get if you were a paid subscriber to our Substack, to Zeteo.com. So please do consider becoming a paid subscriber tonight. Support our journalism, our analysis, the kind of guests and conversations we have. Head over to Zeteo.com, Zeteo.com, become a subscriber, and then come back here at 11:30 where we'll be carrying on our discussions and looking at the results as they come in. A big night, a historic night. See you soon.